The boy's voice carried further than he intended. He said it the way teenagers sometimes do when they are trying to sound unimpressed, pitching the words for the two friends beside him rather than for the crowd, not understanding yet that sound moves differently in a place where no one is speaking. He said Mitchell was just standing there. He said a person could walk right up and the guy would not do a single thing. He said it was kind of sad, actually the whole bit. Grown man marching back and forth in the heat for tourists. What no one in the crowd around him moved to correct was the part about the grown man. Mitchell Hassan was 26 years old and had been standing post at the tomb of the unknown soldier for 14 months. He had walked those 21 steps more times than he could number. He had done it in heat that climbed past 90 degrees and in rain that came in from the east in gray sheets, and once in a February ice storm when the temperature on the plaza dropped to 11 degrees and the tourists went home and he walked anyway, because the post is not closed for weather, and because there are 3 unknown soldiers buried beneath that marble who cannot go inside. What that boy could not have seen from behind the rope was the specific quality of Mitchell's stillness, which was nothing like the stillness of a man standing because he has nowhere to go. It was the stillness of a man who has already been to the place where stillness fails, where everything you can do is not enough, and who came home from that place carrying something he cannot put down. That morning was a Monday in May, overcast but bright. The light diffused through a high layer of cloud so that everything on the plaza was illuminated without shadow. The Memorial Day wreath-laying ceremony had concluded 40 minutes earlier. The official party had departed, and the crowd of perhaps 300 had thinned to something nearer 120, the casual visitors claiming space on the amphitheater steps and along the stone rail, while the families who had come specifically, who had driven from Richmond and from Harrisburg and from Charlotte, stood closer to the rope, quieter, keeping themselves a little apart from the rest. Among those families, near the east corner of the rope, stood a woman named Donna Reyes. She was 53 years old and wore a small silver pin on the left side of her coat, a gold star set in blue enamel, the size of a shirt button. She had been standing in approximately the same position for 20 minutes, and she had not spoken to anyone. She had her hands clasped in front of her, and she was watching Mitchell walk. Mitchell did not know Donna was there. He did not permit himself to scan the crowd for faces. That was not what the walk was for. He had completed what an outside observer might loosely call a rotation, though that word does not carry enough weight for what it is. He walked 21 steps south along the black rubber mat, stopped with his right heel on the edge, waited 21 seconds facing the crowd, shifted his rifle from his right shoulder to his left in 4 counted movements, turned, waited another 21 seconds facing the tomb, and walked 21 steps north. At the north end, he stopped again. He turned again. He waited. He walked back. Each step was 30 inches. Each pause was counted by a number that is not arbitrary, because 21 is the highest salute in military ceremony. The salute rendered to heads of state and to national colors, and the men below that marble have earned it every time. The recruiter standing with the youth enlistment group on the civilian side of the rope was a staff sergeant named Weller, and he had brought 7 members of his delayed entry program group to Arlington that morning as part of an orientation visit. 3 of them were 17 years old. 4 were 18. One of the 17-year-olds was Caleb Durst, who had signed his enlistment contract 6 weeks earlier in a recruiting office in Northern Virginia, and who had not yet been to basic training, and who was carrying, on that particular morning, the kind of confidence that belongs to a person who has just made a large commitment and has not yet discovered what the commitment costs. He was not a cruel boy. That is worth saying plainly, because the story can be misread if it is not said. He was 17, and he had grown up in a world that does not readily supply occasions for reverence, where the distance between a person and any recorded image of anything is approximately 4 seconds, where the scale of a thing is often measured by whether it is worth filming. He had signed a paper that said he would go where the army sent him, and he believed that paper meant something, and he was proud of it. The problem was that he had not yet learned the difference between pride and certainty. He said it quietly the first time, leaning toward the boy beside him, whose name was Marcus. "It's like a toy soldier," he said. "You know, the whole uniform thing. Toy soldier." Marcus looked at the ground. He did not say anything. Staff Sergeant Weller was 8 feet away, explaining the history of the tomb to the other members of the group, his voice low and steady. He did not hear Caleb. Mitchell heard none of this. The distance and the ambient sound of the plaza kept it from him. He walked his 21 steps. He turned. He counted. He walked back. The chrome of his M14 rifle caught what light the cloud allowed and held it, and his white gloves moved with the rifle in a single fluid motion at each end of the walk, always the same motion, always the same 4 counts, because the ceremony is not decoration. It is a promise kept in the only way a promise of that size can be kept, which is by repetition, which is by showing up regardless of what the day contains. If you have spent any time reading about the old guard, if you have ever tried to understand what a sentinel at the tomb actually carries on his body on a given morning, you already understand that what appears from 40 feet away as ceremony is from up close a kind of architecture, each element load-bearing. The shoes are polished to a shine that requires, in the days preceding a post, somewhere between 6 and 8 hours of careful work with a heated spoon and black polish, building up the leather in layers until the toe cap holds a reflection clear enough to read a face in. The uniform is pressed with creases that do not vary by a fraction of an inch across the whole length of the service. The chrome of the rifle must not carry a single smudge. All of this is visible, and all of it is the point. If you find yourself watching this and wondering whether you have ever held yourself to that standard in anything, that feeling is worth sitting with. And if this kind of story speaks to something in you, there is a subscribe button below this video that asks very little of you and keeps more of them coming. Now, back to the watch. At approximately 10:35, Caleb's group was joined at the rope by a family that had come from the wreath-laying ceremony, 2 older men in VFW caps, and a woman in her 60s who placed her hand on the rope and then removed it, as though she had remembered it was not hers to touch. The group shuffled slightly to make room. Caleb moved right along the rope, closer to the mat than he had been. From that position, he could see Mitchell's face at the south turn. Mitchell's expression at the turn was not blank, not rigidly mechanical, not the performance face of someone pretending there is no crowd. It was something else. It was the face of a person who is conducting a private conversation with the specific weight of a duty, a face that has room in it for very little else. Caleb interpreted this as absence. He held his phone up and framed a shot. He did not cross the rope. He kept his elbows on the right side of it, but he raised the phone until the screen showed Mitchell at the full south turn, and he said, loudly enough now that 4 people near him turned to look, "Absolute toy soldier. I mean, what does he even do if you mess with him? Nothing. He literally cannot do anything." The woman in her 60s turned her head. One of the men in VFW caps took a slow breath through his nose. Marcus took 2 small steps away from Caleb, creating a gap that said something without words. Donna Reyes at the east corner turned her head toward the sound. She had been watching Mitchell. She watched Caleb now. Staff Sergeant Weller heard it this time. He moved toward Caleb with the particular gait of a man who is not rushing, but who will arrive very shortly. He spoke quietly into Caleb's ear for about 30 seconds. Caleb nodded once, put the phone in his pocket, and stood with his arms at his sides. He had the look of a person who has been reminded of something he knew and chose to forget. The moment passed. The walk continued. 21 steps south. Halt. 21 seconds. Rifle shift. Turn. 21 seconds. 21 steps north. There is something that happens to a person who watches this ritual attentively for more than 5 minutes. The rhythm of it begins to map onto the watching person's breathing, the way music can. Except that music asks you to feel something, and this asks you to hold something, to hold still in the specific way the sentinel holds still, to take on a fraction of the weight the ceremony carries. The veterans along the rope understood this immediately. Several of them had moved their hands from their pockets to their sides, or from their sides to their hearts. One of the older men had not moved his hand from the peak of his VFW cap for a full minute. Caleb had his phone out again. He was not going to cross the rope. He had told himself that explicitly, in the way a person tells himself a rule in order to feel that he is following it while already planning the exception. He was going to lean over just to get the angle. He was going to keep his feet on the civilian side. He was going to get a picture of the sentinel's face at the north turn, close enough to actually see it, close enough to show something worth showing. He leaned. His left foot came off the ground and extended across the rope line. He was not 10 inches past the rope when the woman in the VFW group said, "Hey," in a voice that was not loud but that carried the specific authority of someone who does not use it lightly. The man beside her put his hand on the rope without thinking. Marcus said Caleb's name once, quietly, the way you say a name when you are hoping to stop something before it is too late. Mitchell was at the north end of the walk. He was in his paws. His back was to the crowd. What no one in that crowd yet knew was that this moment, Caleb's foot across the rope, his phone raised, his voice 6 minutes earlier still hanging in the air over the plaza, was not the first time Mitchell had stood this close to the edge of what a person could endure without flinching. He had been closer to it than this. He had stood closer to things that could not be controlled, and he had stood there with less certainty about what came next. In 2019, Mitchell had been a 24th Infantry Division rifleman on a 3-vehicle patrol in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. Not yet a member of the Old Guard, not yet thinking about a posting to Arlington. He had been thinking, on that particular morning, about the convoy brief, about the road surface, about the vehicle spacing. Private First Class Aaron Cole had been in the second vehicle. He was 22 years old and from a small town in western Georgia, and he had told Mitchell 2 nights before, during a guard rotation, that he kept a photograph of his mother's backyard in his left breast pocket because he wanted to carry something green. The town was called Sparta, and Aaron's mother kept a half-acre of grass behind the house that she mowed herself with a push mower every Saturday in the months when the grass came in, and Aaron had taken the photograph on a leave week before deployment because he had not yet learned that the photographs that mattered later were the ones taken without occasion. He had asked Mitchell to take the picture during a barbecue the evening before he flew back, and he had stood in the yard with his back to the fence line and the late June sky behind him and the grass freshly cut. And he had been smiling at his sister, who was standing behind Mitchell with a paper plate and was saying something Mitchell had not heard. The shutter had clicked once. Aaron had not asked to see the result. He had folded the print into his uniform 2 weeks later, and Mitchell had thought no more about it until he stood beside the casket 6 months after that, and his hand had moved to the photograph in his own pocket without his deciding to. The road outside the patrol base gave way without warning. The morning had been ordinary up to that point in the small, particular way that mornings before something unrecoverable often are. The convoy brief had run 16 minutes. The vehicles had checked out clean at the lot inspection. Aaron had been quiet at the brief, which was not unusual for him before a movement, and he had shared a piece of candy with the gunner of his vehicle on the walk to the lot. A habit he had picked up somewhere in his first month of deployment because the gunner did not get breakfast on movement mornings. The patrol had cleared the wire at 6:12 in the morning. The road surface had looked unchanged from the previous day, the same compacted dirt and gravel that the engineers had cleared the week before, the same set of culverts that ran beneath it where the seasonal water drained, and the men in the vehicles had been doing the work of watching the surface and the shoulders and the high ground with the disciplined attention that the patrol leader expected. Mitchell had been in the lead vehicle. He had been thinking, just before it happened, about a letter from his mother that had arrived in the mail 2 days earlier and that he had not yet answered. The kind of small, unfinished domestic accounting that a man on patrol can carry alongside the larger weight of the route without losing either. Then the second vehicle was no longer where it had been. The sound came first, and the shape of the thing followed it. The way a sound can outrun what it belongs to in the first half-second of an event, and what came after was not a memory Mitchell ever attempted to render in sentences, because the rendering would not have honored what the moment had actually contained. He remembered the dust. He remembered the order he had given the gunner. He remembered the way Aaron's hand had been when he reached him, and the way the photograph in Aaron's pocket had been carried out with the rest of what was carried out, folded once at the center, the green of the grass on the inside, the corners worn from the months it had been pressed against fabric. Mitchell came home 6 months later. He applied for Old Guard selection that winter, the application paperwork filled out in a barracks room in Fort Myer, the same room where he had read and reread the selection criteria until the specific requirements had a weight of their own, until the weight felt like something he could carry. The physical requirements, the appearance standards, the specific height and weight measurements, the absence of visible tattoos, the bearing, the attention, the willingness to spend 6 to 8 hours on a pair of shoes. He understood what he was signing on for. He understood it in a way that is not available to a person who has not had a particular kind of morning in a particular mountain province. He carried a photograph in his left breast pocket. It was a small print, roughly the size of a playing card, worn at the edges from months of handling. It was a photograph of Aaron Cole standing in front of his mother's backyard, squinting a little into the camera, smiling. Mitchell had taken the photograph himself 3 weeks before Kunar. He did not think about it consciously during the walk, the way a person does not think about their own heartbeat. It was simply there. He turned at the north end and began the 21 steps south. Caleb's foot was still across the rope. His phone was still raised. He had angled it to catch Mitchell's face coming south, and Mitchell's face came south, and the walk arrived at a point where Mitchell could see, in the precise and unhurried sweep of his peripheral attention, that the barrier had been crossed. He did not break stride. He did not slow. He walked the remaining 12 steps to the south end at the same pace he had walked the first 9. He halted. He turned. He waited the 21 seconds with his face to the crowd. He could see Caleb clearly now. He could see the phone. He could see the foot. He could see the 4 people near Caleb who had each independently created a small space between themselves and the boy. the physical grammar of a crowd deciding it does not belong to this particular moment. He could see Staff Sergeant Weller moving from the far side of the group, too far away, not yet within reach. He could see Donna Reyes at the east corner, her hands no longer clasped, her right hand now at her mouth. He waited the 21 seconds. He shifted his rifle. He turned. He waited the second 21 seconds. And then Caleb, whose courage or whose foolishness, and the distance between those two things was shrinking in real time, whose confidence in the mechanics of the moment had not yet been revised by what was coming, said it again, loud enough this time for 15 people to hear without straining. For a man in his 60s, 3 positions down to close his eyes briefly. For a Gold Star mother at the east corner to drop her hand from her mouth because she needed both hands now, clasped at her sternum. "I mean it, he's just a toy soldier," Caleb said. "Watch. He's not going to do anything. He literally can't." And then he stepped fully across the rope, both feet, on the mat side of the chain, phone raised, 8 inches from the restricted area. Mitchell had walked 3 of his 21 steps north when Caleb crossed. He continued for 2 more steps. Then he stopped. He had not stopped at a turn. He was not at either end of the walk. He stopped in the middle of the mat, facing north, the tomb close behind the crowd and Caleb close ahead of him. And the stop was so contrary to the established rhythm of the ceremony that the crowd responded with a collective breath that was audible. He turned slowly until he was facing Caleb. Not the crowd, Caleb specifically. The rifle came down from his shoulder in the 4-count movement, held in front of him in both hands at port arms, and his eyes settled on Caleb's face with the attention of a man who has all the time in the world and intends to use it. Caleb did not lower the phone immediately. He took a breath that was half a laugh, the reflex of a person who has not yet updated their understanding of what is happening. He said quietly but audibly, in the voice of someone explaining a foregone conclusion, "See, he can't do anything to me." And the words went out into the crowd, and the crowd had no answer for them. And the silence after was the loudest silence on the plaza all morning. Mitchell spoke then. He had a moderate voice, not deep, not harsh, trained to carry across distance without being raised. He spoke at the same volume he used in a room. "Sir," he said, "you are standing in a restricted area. Please step back now." 11 words, not a threat, not an accusation. A statement of fact followed by a single instruction, issued at the same register as the ceremony itself, procedural as the count of 21 seconds, as level as the chrome of the rifle. The crowd did not move. Caleb opened his mouth. He started to say the word again, the toy, the first syllable of it, and the sound came out and then stopped. He looked at Mitchell's face, and the word stopped. He looked at the rifle, still and perfect in Mitchell's white-gloved hands. He looked at the people on the other side of the rope, and what he saw in their faces was not anger, was not judgment, was something he had fewer words for at 17 than he would have at 25, which was weight, a specific gravity of attention, the kind that comes from a crowd that has decided collectively what a moment means. He stepped back. He crossed the rope to the civilian side. His foot cleared the chain. He stood there with the phone at his side, and something had changed in his posture that anyone watching could read without being told what it was. Mitchell did not immediately resume the walk. He stood at port arms for 3 full seconds. The crowd was so quiet that the distant sound of traffic on Memorial Drive was audible for the first time. Then he raised the rifle back to his shoulder in the 4-count movement, and he walked back to the south end of the mat, halted, turned, waited the 21 seconds with his face to the crowd, shifted his rifle, turned, waited the second 21 seconds, and walked north. 21 steps. It was in those first resumed steps that a man in a dark green uniform appeared at the east entrance to the plaza, moving at the measured pace of a person with authority who is not required to hurry. He was Sergeant Roy Pham of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, senior sentinel, and sergeant of the guard for the morning rotation. He had been watching from the sentinel box at the plaza's edge, and he came onto the stone floor without announcing himself, which was its own kind of announcement. He crossed to where Caleb was standing, and he stopped 2 feet away, and he spoke to him quietly for about 45 seconds. No one could hear exactly what was said. What was audible was the register, steady, factual, the voice of an institution that has procedures for this exact situation and does not need to raise its volume to enforce them. Caleb nodded twice. His eyes went to the ground and came back up. Roy said one more thing, and Caleb nodded a 3rd time. Roy then turned to Staff Sergeant Weller, who had arrived at Caleb's side, and the two of them spoke for perhaps 20 seconds. Roy's expression did not change. Weller's changed twice. First a tightening around the eyes, then a deliberate return to flat. Roy gave a single nod, turned, and walked back to the sentinel box at the same measured pace, his hands clasped behind him, his footfall inaudible on the stone. What Caleb would say later, and he did say it, though not immediately, was that the conversation with Roy was the smaller part of what he had received. Roy had told him, clearly and without drama, that crossing the rope at the tomb of the unknown soldier is a federal violation under Arlington National Cemetery regulations, and that on a different morning and under different circumstances, the outcome of that choice could look considerably different. Roy had told him where to find the regulation in writing. Roy had told him once and moved on. The larger part was what Caleb could not yet put words around. He was standing in the crowd now, properly on the civilian side, and he was watching Mitchell walk. He had been watching for perhaps 3 minutes when the woman at the east corner, the one with the small silver pin, took a quiet step forward. She was not approaching Caleb. She was simply adjusting her position at the rope, moving slightly closer to the mat side, the way people do at the end of a ceremony when the crowd is thinning and the rope no longer needs to manage the press of bodies. She was close enough to Caleb now that he could see the pin. He did not know what it meant immediately, but he had been in enough Army offices in the past 6 weeks to recognize the shape. He had seen it on walls in framed photographs in the brief history of the Army portion of his DEP orientation. He understood at least that the person who wore it had paid for the right to stand at any rope barrier in Arlington at whatever angle they chose. She was watching Mitchell walk with an expression that was not grief and was not relief and was not simply watching. It was the specific expression of a person for whom this ceremony is not symbolic, for whom the marble and the inscription and the 21 steps are connected by a direct line to something real and irrevocable, and who has been coming back to this plaza in part because the ceremony keeps the line open. Caleb looked at her for a moment. He looked at the mat. He watched Mitchell halt at the south end, shift the rifle in 4 clean counts, turn, wait, and walk north. He watched the turn at the north end, the halt, the 21 seconds, the weight of it. He did not reach for his phone. There are things a person cannot tell themselves into understanding. The paperwork he had signed, the recruiting office, the flag above the door, the handshakes from men who had been to places he had not, the pride of the decision, all of that was real, and none of it had been sufficient for this. This was different. This was the difference between knowing a word and understanding what the word costs. He said something then. Not to anyone in particular, not to Marcus, who was beside him again, standing close. He said it toward the mat, toward the walking, toward the white marble and the worn rubber and the precision of the white gloves and the weight of whatever was in that left breast pocket that he could not have known about. He said, "I didn't get it. Before today, I didn't understand what I signed up for." Marcus looked at him. The older woman with the gold star pin looked straight ahead at the mat. She did not respond to what Caleb said. She did not need to. The man in the VFW cap 3 positions down shifted his weight and moved his hand back to his cap brim and kept it there. And that was as close to an answer as the moment required. Mitchell walked. He walked the 21 steps south. He halted. He waited. He shifted the rifle. He turned. He waited again. He walked north. At the north turn, he halted. And in the pause, in the wait of the 21 seconds, his right hand was completely still against the grip of the M14, and his left hand was completely still beneath the barrel. And the photograph in his left breast pocket was exactly where it had been since the beginning of the rotation, which was where it was always kept, folded once at the center, with Aaron's face on the outside, right against the fabric, right against the seam. He did not think about Aaron in any narrated or ordered way during the walk. He did not recite a memory or construct a sentence. He simply carried the fact of Aaron the way he carried the rifle, as weight distributed correctly, as something that had to be carried and could be carried, and was being carried now. The rotation continued for another 18 minutes before the relief sentinel arrived, and the changing of the guard ceremony began. Caleb's group did not leave. Staff Sergeant Weller had arranged originally for a brief visit before moving to another part of the tour. But Weller did not give the signal to move. He watched the group watching the mat. He watched Caleb watching the mat. He made a decision based on what he saw in Caleb's posture, which was no longer the posture of a boy trying to look unimpressed. The changing of the guard proceeded with the same procedural exactness that governs every rotation. The relief sentinel arrived from the tomb quarters, and the inspection of the relief was conducted at the rail, each element of the uniform examined by the sergeant of the guard with a white-gloved hand, the chrome of the rifle checked, the crease of the trousers gauged, the toe cap's reflection confirmed. Roy conducted this inspection with the same quiet precision he had used addressing Caleb, moving from point to point without comment, recording deficiency or confirming standard through gesture alone. When the relief was passed, the ceremony moved to the mat. The outgoing and incoming sentinels met at the center, the commands given, the rifles presented and returned, the post formally transferred. Mitchell, once the command was given and the ceremony complete, stepped off the mat to the sentinel quarters entrance and did not look back at the crowd. He did not look for recognition. He had not been looking for it across the full rotation. The walk was not for the crowd's approval, and the moment with Caleb had not been for Caleb's understanding. It had been for the 3 men below the marble, who had no voice in the matter and no recourse and no way to ask for it, and for Aaron Cole specifically, who had kept a photograph of a green yard in his breast pocket because he wanted to carry something that reminded him there was a world outside the patrol routes and the mountain roads and the weight of the gear. The new sentinel's boots came down on the mat with the first step of 21. The crowd had thinned further but had not emptied. Donna was still at the east corner. She had not moved from that position in 40 minutes. She watched the new sentinel begin the walk, and after 2 full transits, she moved her right hand from her sternum to the rope, not gripping it, just resting 3 fingers on the top link of the chain. And she stayed like that for a while, not speaking, not turning away. Caleb stood on the civilian side of the rope for the full relief ceremony and for 2 additional rotations by the new sentinel. He had not spoken since the sentence that was not addressed to anyone. Marcus stood beside him. The other members of the DEP group had migrated gradually back to where Weller stood, talking quietly among themselves, but Marcus had stayed and Caleb had not moved, and the two of them watched the walk the way you watch something you have decided to understand. At some point, Caleb looked at his phone. Not to film. He looked at the time. He had been at the rope for nearly an hour. He had come to Arlington that morning, prepared to be unimpressed, prepared to have confirmed for himself a picture of what military service looked like that felt manageable and comprehensible and contained within the frame of something you could photograph and carry away. What he had instead was the specific sensation of a frame having been removed. Not the ceremony's frame, not the tomb's frame, but the frame he had placed around his own enlistment, the one that allowed him to feel that he had understood the scope of it from the outside before he had gone anywhere near the inside. He put the phone back in his pocket. Staff Sergeant Weller appeared at his right. Not in the corrective capacity, this time. He stood beside Caleb, the way a senior person stands beside a junior one when the junior person has arrived somewhere and the senior person wants to mark the arrival without making a speech of it. After a while, Weller said, "You ready to move on?" Caleb took a breath. He looked at the tomb once more, at the inscription, at the marble bright even under the overcast sky, at the ribbon of the wreath at the base. He said yes. He did not say it the way he had said things that morning. He said it with the cadence of a person who has added a word to their vocabulary, not by looking it up, but by standing close enough to the thing the word is trying to name. The group moved toward the columbarium. Donna Reyes stayed at the rope until the next rotation was half complete. She watched the new sentinel walk 11 of the 21 steps south, and then she unclasped her fingers from the chain link and took 3 steps back from the rope, and stood for a moment with her hands at her sides. She had not cried. Her eyes were dry. She never cried here. She had decided that a long time ago that this was not a place for weeping, that the ceremony asked something of the people watching it, and that what it asked was exactly what it asked of the sentinel, which was presence, which was the willingness to stand and hold something without putting it down. She turned and walked toward the steps. Mitchell, in the sentinel quarters, had removed his cap and placed it on the prescribed shelf and stood for a moment in the particular quiet of a room that adjoins a sacred space. The sound of the plaza audible as a low register of footfall and distant ambient voice, and underneath it, the steady count of the new sentinel's cadence on the mat. He unbuttoned the top button of his jacket and then did not unbutton the second one. Not yet, because the rotation after his would begin in 40 minutes and the uniform had to be right for it. He reached into the left breast pocket of his jacket and took out the photograph. It was small and worn at the edges in the way of photographs that are handled often. The corners soft, the print slightly faded from the heat of a body carried close. Aaron was standing in a yard in western Georgia, squinting into the camera. The sky behind him, a pale summer blue, the grass behind him, the specific green of a southern yard after rain. He was smiling in the way of a person who did not know he was being photographed, which is a different smile than the one you put on, wider at the edges and carrying in it a quality that photographs of people who are gone sometimes carry, which is the specific appearance of a person who believed he had a great deal of time. Mitchell looked at it for a moment. He did not speak. He did not need to. Then he folded the photograph once along its worn crease, Aaron's face on the outside, and placed it back in the left breast pocket. He buttoned the pocket. He sat down on the bench to wait for his next rotation. In 40 minutes, he would walk back out onto the mat, and the 21 steps would begin again, as they had begun every day for 14 months, as they would begin tomorrow and the day after that. And in every weather and on every calendar day, this country recognizes as ordinary, and on every one it recognizes as sacred, because the tomb does not close for weather, and the 3 men beneath the marble cannot go inside. And a 22-year-old from western Georgia kept a photograph of a green yard in his breast pocket, because he wanted to carry something that reminded him the world outside was worth walking back to. The 21 steps began,